My name is Bill Richburgh. I was born in South Georgia back in 1950. About 2 hours from the Florida border. Growing up as a child, we've always had racism as a child because in South Georgia, that was the norm. Everybody knew who the Ku Klux Klan was, the sheriff, the deputies. 95% of the police force was KKK. You know, so it was kind of like you had to know your place, and you couldn't be alone at certain times, at certain parts of the evening by yourself. You had to be with somebody because you can end up missing, and you just be a missing person. They're not going to take any time to find out what happened to you. But as a child growing up, we had segregated schools. Blacks went to one school, whites went to one school, and that's just the way it was. Of course, the whites had the better books, they had the better material. We had the hand-me-down books. Some of them were kind of ragged, but we had to make do with what we had, so that's exactly what we did. So racism, it's always been there. But fortunately, I had good parents who taught me not to hate and taught me that hatred is kind of like a virus. Once it permeates into your body and get out of control, you'll always be hateful. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to do that. We lived in the country. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. We had a well in the backyard. We had kerosene lamps, wooden stove. It wasn't as convenient as it is today. Today is like, it's a luxury compared to what it was when I was growing up. So racism is something that we deal with. It was the norm. It wasn't uncommon to find out that someone was lynched. Not anybody that I know personally, but there were times when someone was lynched, and of course we know why it was done, but we don't know who did it. So we just taught not to be alone by yourself. You got to be careful, and that's what we did. There was a cop in my neighborhood, name was Officer Bazemore. He was a white cop, but he was a friend of the family. He used to come by and pick me up, and I used to ride in the cop car with him and, turn the siren on and all that. I was kind of like the envy of the neighborhood because I got a chance to ride in the cop car. But Mr. Bazemore took me down to the county jail. And he said, "Come here, William." He said, get in there. And I was afraid. I was going, why is he supposed to be a friend of the family? Why are you locking me up? He put me behind bars, closed the door, he locked it. I started crying. I was like, why are you doing this to me? You're supposed to be a friend. So I stayed in there about 5 minutes. So he opened the door and let me out. He said, "How did that feel?" I was like, I'm just scared. He said, "Okay," he said, "I don't ever want you to do anything. Don't do anything to let anybody put you behind bars. Nothing. Don't let them put you behind the bars for nothing." And I remember that. So after he took me out, we went back to the back of the jail. He had a garden back there. We kind of like worked in the garden. But that incident, that one incident, stayed on my mind like forever. Back in 1965, I think it was, a friend of mine and I was going to a basketball game in the next county. And I had a Bonneville. And it was a Bonneville? Oldsmobile 223, and they had glass pipes. That's when glass pipes first came out. So we was going through this one county, and my pipes was blasting like they were supposed to. So this cop pulled me over, and he said, "Boy, let me see your driver's license." We didn't have a driver's license with the pictures on like we do today. So I gave him a driver's license. He said, "You're disturbing the peace." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Your muffler, you're disturbing the peace." I said, "No." I said, "These are glass pipes. They're legal." He said, "You calling me a live boy?" And I couldn't say, "Yes, sir, you called me a live," because I knew what was going to happen afterwards. So anyway, he said, "Well, that's going to cost you $20. It's around Christmas time." I said, "I don't have $20. I had $20. I said, "I don't have $20. He said, "It's going to cost you $20. I'm going to put your black ass in jail." I said, well, put me in jail. I was kind of mouthy during that time. I wasn't the kind of guy that was, a kid that was afraid. And my mom always said my mouth gonna get me in trouble. So I said, well, put me in jail then. So he put me in jail. He put me in jail, and I was like, this just ain't right. So my friend that was with me, I told him, his name was Kirk, I told him to, let my mom know that I'm in jail, So they came in, I think I stayed in jail for about 4 or 5 hours. They came around midnight and got me out. Paid the $20 and got me out. But if he had looked in my glove compartment, everybody carried a weapon. Everybody. I mean, that was just the way it was. Not to be offensive, but to protect yourself. And I had that in the glove compartment, but he never looked. So that incident right there taught me that, life isn't fair. My mom and dad said, don't be prejudiced, don't be bigoted, don't all none of that stuff. Okay, well, how can I not be when I'm treated so unfairly? But I took it with a grain of salt. That's where it is, that's where it was. There's nothing I can do about it. I don't know anybody in my hometown that went, but we knew about Dr. Martin Luther King. We know about the bombings in Birmingham. We know about all that stuff, but we didn't have anybody in my town that took, place within the civil rights movement. But I always wanted to march with Dr. King, but I was too young, and he never came to my city. But yeah, it was pretty. It wasn't violent as it is today, but it was pretty nonviolent. We took a lot: the water hosing, the dogs, trying to sit at the counter to be equal like everybody else. They would spit on you, put ketchup all on your head and stuff like that, to try to discourage you from trying to be equal. So we knew we couldn't do it, so we just stayed in our place, so to speak. I mean, we was kind of like outnumbered. We were the real minority, so that's the way it was. The movie theaters, we had to sit up in the balcony. White folks sit at the bottom. But I thought the balcony was the best part of the theater myself, but I said, okay, I'm sitting up at the top, And we had, the restaurants were segregated. They had a sign in the back of the restaurant that says, colored in the back, white folks in the front. And that's how we ordered our food. We ran to the back of the restaurant. Because we could not sit in the same area with, white people. But still, it's the way it was, it's the way it is, and we just dealt with it, Water fountains for colored was always dirty. There was water fountains for white folks. Of course, we had sitting in the back of the bus. I thought the back of the bus was a good place to be. It was kind of bumpy, but I didn't mind sitting in the back of the bus. But the problem was, when they tell you you have to sit in the back of the bus, that was the problem. Let me choose where I want to sit, If the bus got crowded, we didn't have buses in my hometown, but in the bigger cities, if the bus got crowded, you got to stand up or get off. That's the way it was, We had trains, but black was in the last car, which was called right next to the caboose, which was called the colored car. So that's where all the black folks was, cramped up in that one little car. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff I had to deal with. Well, I was in high school during that time, and I got my draft card, which was 2A. 2A means that you were still in school. They couldn't draft you. But as soon as you graduated, you became 1A. Then they drafted you into the Army. One of my friends, his name was Willie Frank, he stepped on the mine. He was killed, closed casket. He was killed in Nam, and I said, I'm not going to the Army because they don't take care of people. So as soon as I graduated, I was supposed to go to the FBI Academy, but for some reason, I needed more units at this particular school I was in. So I had to drop that, and a friend of mine, she went on, and I stayed back trying to get those credits, but I couldn't join the academy. So once I got my my draft card, 1A, I knew exactly what that meant. So everybody was, crying and going on. I said, well, I ain't going yet. I'm still here, So I was trying to find out what are my options. I don't want to go in the Army. I'm not going into the Army. But if I have to go, I'm going with the Marines. So I called a Marine recruiter, and he said, I'll be there to pick you up tomorrow at, I don't know, noon or whatever. And I was waiting on pins and needles, but he never showed up. So my date to go to the, what do you call it, the, I can't remember the name of it, where they take all the recruits, whatever. My date was closing in, so I said, I gotta do something quick. So I went down to the recruiter. I was gonna join the Air Force. Air Force said, we can't take you because you don't have the graduation yet. You haven't graduated. I said, crap. So I went to the Marine Corps. He said, we'll take you, but he never showed up. So I went to the Navy. The Navy said, we'll get you in. So I took the test, the ASVAB test. It took me to Jacksonville, and I got all my tests and everything done. And I was like, okay, I'm in. But the recruiter said, we gotta put you in the delayed program because we reached our quota. I said, oh crap, they're not gonna let me in. I'm gonna end up in the Army anyway. So I had to go back home. Everybody was crying, and I said, what are you doing back here? I said, well, they reached their quota. I gotta wait until November. So actually I waited until around December, and I went into the induction center and went to boot camp in Orlando, Florida. And my recruiter said, where you want to go? Where you want to be stationed? I mean, I had no idea. I said, anywhere in California. So I ended up at the Fleet, 32nd Street. So San Diego was my first duty, and I was happy with that. Yeah. As far as meeting people of different races, in my hometown, there was only black people, white people, and a few Indians, Native Americans. That was it. I had never seen a Mexican. I had never seen anybody of any other culture. So in boot camp, I met this young man. His name was David Gonzalez. He was from Silver City, New Mexico. First Mexican I ever seen. Dave and I became good friends in boot camp. We went to the same ship, and we hung out, on the ship and, different ports. David and I it was black and brown against the town. That was our motto. So that was my first time meeting people of different so-called races. So there was Mexicans on there. There were people there from, joined the Navy from the Philippines, and we had some Japanese, we had some Chinese. And I was like, wow, all these different people, this is great. And I got along with everybody, pretty much. I didn't have any enemies that I can think of. And then I said to myself, now I see what my parents were saying about you can't put everybody in the same basket as far as being a racist. And that was my first time meeting people of other cultures. So black and brown against the town, that's what we were, Not that we were prejudiced or anything like that, but we stuck together and supported each other. I did 4 campaigns in Vietnam. I was with the Navy Amphibious Unit. And the last mission was Song Than 72. That was the last Navy battle that we had, and it was pretty bloody. It was pretty scary, but I survived it. I met my wife in National City. She was in the Navy also. She was stationed at 32nd Street. At that time, I was on the board of the USS Duluth, and from there I transferred to Navy Outstation Miramar during the time they had Fighter Town in USA. So I met my wife 76. We got married in 78. Had a couple of kids. She's also retired from the Navy Chief. I was retired Navy Senior Chief. And we've been married now for 42 years, I don't know how she put up with me that long, but it worked out. And one of the best decisions I made was to get married, because I was kind of wild, as far as being out there. So that was a good catch for me.
My name is Hilliard Joshua Meeks. I was born in San Jose, California in 1980 to a single parent, my mother, and kind of your statistic, I guess you could say, of a young black youth growing up without a father. So I guess the first experience that I had with racism had to come around third grade, you know. We always used to like play the dozens with folks, and you know, that's when you're like picking on each other and just joking around. But whenever we would start to shoot the dozens or play the dozens with white folks, it would always end up like with go back to Africa or get called stupid names like African booty scratcher or something like that. You know, some dumb mess. But I didn't really realize how much it started to take a toll on us as young black kids, because we started to kind of devalue ourselves. I mean, we used to pick on each other for who was darker or who was lighter, and it was like we were applying the paper bag test based off of that value of the way the culture was around folks in the 80s and whatnot. And I was kind of rough because he always felt like myself, being a darker skinned man, I always felt kind of undervalued. Everybody else that was lighter skinned, I guess it was cool to be a light skinned cat back then, but it wasn't. It didn't feel good as a youth. You know what I mean? And it was wrong. It was just straight up wrong. That kind of transpired later on. When you get to middle school, I remember getting suspended for playing with a friend of mine, and we explained to folks we weren't fighting, we were just joking around playing. And the lady pointed out, because back then it was the crisscross era, all the kids had their hair braided, and she pointed out the fact that I was braided, that I was in some gang or something like that. And it confused me because one, I was in middle school. It's not, it wasn't really common back then for you to be in middle school and be in a gang. And two, to be suspended over fighting, which I wasn't, suspended over playing was just weird, you know what I mean? And that kind of, again, it kind of made me understand, that kind of undervalued. That wouldn't have happened to a white kid in my school. And this is in California, so you would have thought it would have been more liberal, so to speak. So I didn't understand that. Later on in high school, I remember there was race wars for a bit, and it was over some stupid stuff, like somebody dated somebody, and I don't even remember what the problem was, but I remember as black kids, black and brown kids actually, both were worried about taking care of each other because we were, basically in a hostile group of folks who were being attacked by Asian kids, which was interesting. And I remember one particular incident. I was walking to the library on campus with my best friend at the time, Jason Hamill. We were walking, and it was just the two of us, and out of nowhere, like about 8 Asian kids popped out, and they were gonna stab us with pencils, and they were breaking off pieces of posts that were holding up trees, and we were gonna beat us with it. And I just remember like just trying to stick up for each other because we didn't want to get beat up, and we didn't have anything to do with whatever the incident was that started these issues on campus. So that was a trip, like to just really kind of be pinpointed because of the color of your skin, to be attacked. So that was odd. I remember the reason why I joined the military is kind of a few reasons. One, I didn't have that camaraderie with my, with my dad that I should have. So I kind of wanted to see what it was like to grow up and learn from a bunch of men, like what was that to be about. So I joined the Marine Corps. and it was a good time. It was different, you know. But I remember for myself, the other part of the narrative is I wanted to show America, you know, a worth as a black man, that, hey, you know, if I'm coming out here for you, I'm hoping that you guys will feel the same, you know, when the chips are down. And it's just kind of rough to see some of the violence towards black folks. It's part of the reason why I got out, was that it kind of felt like that whole incident where the country doesn't care as much, you know. So I was like, why am I over here fighting for this? And you guys don't care. And even worse, amongst black folks, why black on black crime was so prevalent, you know, was upsetting, you know, because that was another thing. I'm over here trying to do the best that I can, and we're hurting each other. I don't understand, you know. So that happens, you know, and I understand that, and I think everybody needs to understand that black on black crime is a community issue amongst black people that we're working on, I feel. And I think it's amazing to see the statistics of how much that's dropped since the 90s to now. So it's a very positive thing to see black on black crime drop from the 90s to where it is now. And I'm hoping that we just keep working towards that going lower and lower, you know, as time goes on. So that is amending amongst each other. What I also noticed that is cool is I think, I guess, being raised out here, there is a lot more camaraderie with, you know, all races of people. I've got you know, friends of every race, every ethnicity, and, you know, we can talk. We sit down and we talk out things. If there's an issue, I think the coolest part is, you know, my white friends coming up to me to ask me, you know, like, hey, do I have this wrong? What am I missing? And that was before all this started. That was before all this kicked off with police brutality and whatnot. Just having my friends wanting to better understand me was actually a really cool thing. I can't say that it was the same nationwide, but I think having it be a thing now, and even just before these issues that we were having, is a huge positive thing, because it lets me know that people actually care and want better understanding, you know, of race relations. So I don't think it's as bad as we make it out to be sometimes. So witnessing protests, like, you know, as a kid, like Rodney King happened back when I was barely a teen. Or actually, I don't even think I was a teen yet. I still think I was, you know, preteen. And to see that like unfold, you know, you understood that there was a black man that was beat, you know, ridiculously. They didn't kill him, thank God. You know, they didn't kill that man. But, you know, to sit back and see, that was like the first time that we saw something like that unfold on film, you know? And thinking about it in relationship to now, where everybody's got a camera phone, which really is something that only happened, I'd have to say maybe 13, 14 years ago, camera phones were being, you know, really implemented and people were using them. That's crazy. So, you know, that gap between the early 90s with Rodney King, you know, having all that stuff unfold on camera, and then to have it get to this point in time and have it be so prevalent is just, it's interesting. You got to think to yourself, how often in between did that happen? And we didn't see it on camera. You know, how many times was that happening and there was no evidence, you know? Somebody just went home either, you know, bloody or bruised, or somebody didn't go home at all if the situation had arisen that, you know, that a black man was killed. So it was rough, and you know, I think equal rights was definitely, civil rights was definitely something that that was important to me growing up through high school. So when I got to college, I did go to a protest of the Americas, which was a protest against the globalization of the Americas. And we went and I did that over in Quebec, Canada. And it was a peaceful protest. And we were against, jobs and whatnot being taken out of the Americas and sent off somewhere else. It's part of the issues that we're still fighting now. And we were out there protesting, and it was all peaceful and it was all chill. And all of a sudden, tear gas is getting lobbed at us, and rubber bullets are being shot. It's the first time I saw a rubber bullet, and that was almost 20 years ago, So imagine that. This stuff's been around for a long time. And you realize that it wasn't about, the rioting portion wasn't something that we started. Everybody was chilling, and then it becomes a police officer gets rough with a protester because they've had it and they're done and they don't want to be out there anymore, and start arresting people. And they basically call out a sign to start arresting people, and it gets very physical and violent. And then, cops kind of, or I should say protesters kind of try to start to defend the people that are being hurt. And it was crazy because that was my first feeling of what kind of a war felt like before I actually got into the military and deployed. All the gas, all the smoke, people hurt, bleeding, and whatnot, and it was chaos for a minute. And I just remember coming back and feeling so amped, feeling very upset with the U.S. and with the way people were treated in Canada as well. And came back here, and I sat back and I was like, okay, I protested the globalization of Americas, and for some reason, I'm really upset about what happened to us out there, and what was happening in Seattle was the protest before that. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm very much against the way the government's running things, but why? So I ended up joining. That was another reason why I joined the military, is I wanted to know why I was what was wrong with our government system. And it's interesting because the military is a microcosm for what is wrong with society. Anybody that's in the military will tell you it is just like a very scaled down miniature version of society and what can be wrong with it. Going through the military, closer to the back end of my military career, I got married. Got married to my high school sweetheart, and she's already from a biracial couple. She's Mexican and white, and then of course we got married, and we have two beautiful daughters. And they're definitely the joys of my life. But I will be remiss to say that it's painful watching my oldest daughter go through kind of what we went through as kids. Being judged by the color of her skin and the curliness of her hair. I remember her coming home crying one day from preschool because a kid told her that her skin color is the color of poop. And I was like, that's messed up, I mean, where does a kid learn that? Like why did they feel it was like that? And they pick on her about her hair, being curly, and they pick on her about her size because she was tall. And so I'm like, dang, dude, like you hate to watch that type of history repeat itself with your children, and you don't want them to go through that type of judgment about what they look like, being something that places value upon them. And it's painful, it's definitely painful. And you also see the difference between light and dark, because my youngest, same mom, same me, is very, very light complected in comparison to her sister, and she never had to go through any of that. So for that to happen is just, I don't know, it's sad. It shows you how much the paper bag test is something that is still prevalent. And the paper bag test was basically based off of, if you were darker than a paper bag, you're kind of undervalued. If you're a paper bag lighter, you were kind of valued more. That was more like a slave thing. And it's interesting that was something that still was prevalent, still was prevalent in society, So that's kind of crazy to me. And that even in some cases, we've done it amongst ourselves as black people, degrading darker colored black people on that same test scale. You know, I don't know why we care so much who's light skinned and who's dark skinned. You know, it doesn't make sense. So, yeah, I don't know. So Bill, like, I learned from my mom, like back in the day, that there used to be travel routes when you wanted to go on vacation when you were black. Was that a real thing back in the South?
It was a real thing. They had what they call the Green Book. And the Green Book consists of places where you can live if you're traveling on the road. You couldn't just live anywhere. You know, so if you're going, let's say from Mississippi to Louisiana, you had to go a certain route, and you use your Green Book. It would tell you exactly where you can board, buy food and buy gas. And because you couldn't buy gas, you had to buy gas in the daytime. You couldn't do it at night. You know, you couldn't travel at night. The best time to travel is during the daytime. You know, so yeah, it was happening. It was just like that.
Yeah.
So the Green Book was real.
Oh yeah. You know, my mom used to tell me about, they used to travel from church to church. That was their way of getting from the Midwest down to the South and back and forth, because they were sharecroppers. So yeah, definitely sharecroppers out of Mississippi.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, my parents from the Bahamas, so but they migrated to Florida and Georgia, like before I was born. You know, so, and my father's, and one of the things that one reason why I can't be prejudiced or dislike white people, my father's mother is Jewish, so I got a Jewish grandmother.
Oh, really?
You know, so I didn't get a chance to know her as much as I would like to, but she was a very beautiful woman, and I don't know how she and my grandfather made it in the States, but it goes back to that one drop rule. If you had one drop of black blood, you were considered colored.
Colored, yeah.
And my grandmother wasn't European type Jewish. She was very olive skinned.
Olive skin, yeah.
And beautiful grandmother, yeah. But if I go around hating people, it's kind of like hating my grandmother.
Yeah.
You know, and I did not hate my grandmother.
Yeah, you can't hate your grandmother.
You know, so that was another thing too that caused me to not judge people just because of their melanated skin wasn't dark as mine. It was senseless to me. Yeah, it didn't make sense to me. It still don't make sense, you know.
Yeah, I think that was a pleasure, kind of along those lines of growing up in a melting pot of the Bay Area. Is I had a lot of white friends that were extended family, and their parents looked at me as like one of their kids. And so that was different because you know, they wouldn't let anything happen to me. An atrocity to me, they were just as vocal as my mom was. And so it was interesting to have that happen. And I think that was a very fortunate situation for me, for, like I said, living in a very much a melting pot of California, of Silicon Valley at its earliest stages. So yeah, I mean, my sister to this day is my friend Rebecca Green, or Rebecca Perez now. But she's like my sister. My other sisters is Japanese and white. Is Sandy. But those are the folks that even though they're not my blood relatives, they are definitely my sisters in my heart, because they've always been there to take care of me, and their family's been there. You know, throughout any tough time I've had, their family's been there. So.
Yeah. Another positive aspect of my life, I was in love with this girl. Her name was Beverly Parton. Beautiful girl. The only problem was I could not go to her house. I could not be with her in public because she was white. You know, so I can look at her in high school, but that is all you can do. We can trade glances at each other, but that was it. So there were people that were sneaking around, black and white, you know, meeting each other in the dark. But I dare not meet with this girl because I was so afraid. If they caught you with someone, it was okay for them to be with a black woman. That was no big deal. Hey, that's what we're supposed to do. But if you be with a white woman, nah.
Oh,
you get a cross burned in your yard. And once they burn that cross in your yard, that means that you're on the list. They're gonna take you out once they catch you in, by yourself someplace.
Wow.
Yeah, or they'll burn you out.
So that's what I really meant. It's like once that cross was put in front of your
Once
house,
they cross
it's a mark.
your mark. It's kind of like a mark. It's kind of like leaving a fish at your door, in the newspaper kind of thing. Yeah, you was a marked man, So I enjoy looking at her, but
from a distance.
From a distance, yeah.
You stay over there. No.
But I had quite a few white friends. I used to work in the fields, and tobacco fields, and shade pecan trees, and I had a lot of white friends, and we were friends, but we didn't hang out. Whenever we could, we would hang, but not hang out.
See, that would have been different today. You've been just fine hanging out with them.
Oh yeah. Today would be totally different, But that's
hard.
It's hard, yeah. One of the things I see different, because I'm older, is back in the 60s when they marched, everybody was marching wasn't just black people. You had white people out there, you had Jews out there, you had a lot of people out there that was supporting you.
Right.
Today, I was almost in tears last couple of weeks ago when I looked out there and saw all those young people, this generation, handful of black people, white people, you had Mexicans, you had Asians. I was going like, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's the way it should have been back when I was coming up.
Yeah.
But it's a new generation now.
Well,
it's a totally new generation now. We're tired of it, they're tired of it, and I'm just glad to see it. I wasn't for the looting and the burning, that was wrong.
Right.
But for them out there supporting each other, that was right on.
Oh yeah, and that was the other thing is so much of that looting and the burning, it seemed like it was tainted by outside forces that weren't.
It was.
And that's problematic. But I like what Dave Chappelle said just recently. He dropped his new special, and he said it's the streets talking. He him as a celebrity didn't want to talk, and I agree with him. The streets are finally everybody, collectively are saying something. But it's just like I said, I get bothered by seeing voices like Candace Owens out there. That would rather dig up all the dirt that they can on a black victim and sell that as a justified means of not doing something. And having people like that are sellouts that get paid to do that, because that's what she is. She is paid to be a provocateur, is wrong. And even on the liberal side, the flip side, all these people walking around with kente cloths on it that would never have rocked that in their life, and everybody wants that vote, but I think that's kind of a cheap way to do it. Biden saying you're not black enough if you don't vote for him. I don't agree with that. And no white man should ever tell a black man how black he is, But it should be based off of your principles. It should be why you get voted in and not anything else. Shouldn't have to do with anything race. So, but yeah.
It was crazy to see across the nation they were leaving piles of bricks.
Yeah, I don't know what that was about.
It was for them to break windows,
right,
and to damage and do damage, but nobody know who left them there.
Exactly.
So I'm going like, that's pretty dirty.
Yeah, so it takes something that could be well maintained and beautiful and turn it into something that it's not degrading it,
Yeah.
And it was very terrible to see that. But to watch this go worldwide, Germany just reported having one of the largest of protests this whole thing, and that was pretty amazing. Like that shows the world is changing when we look at it. I don't know how you feel, but with all of our friends that aren't black checking in on us to see that we're okay, it's a very sweet thought. But all of our friends, we ain't got nothing to worry about. You guys are fine. It's all the other folks that kind of are defending people being victims out there, being abused and being hurt, that we got a problem.
That's true. And one of the things I don't think they get is that George Floyd is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh yeah.
that why are we making him a martyr? It's not just about George. It's about all that other stuff that's going on. It's the stuff that you can't see below the water, so to speak. Yeah. But the thing is, it's not just about George. It's about all those years of
all those names.
It's kind of like you got a bag on your shoulder when you got problems. You stuff it in that bag, right? Mm-hmm. The bag was full.
Yeah, it was gonna break.
Everybody walk around with full bags, and they say, okay, the load is heavy, the stress is here. We got to get rid of it somehow, and that's what's happening today.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
not just about George. It's about all this other stuff. People out of jobs, people on lockdown, and then now you got this nonsense. So it just piled up.
Yeah, I mean, and that also makes sense of some of, I wouldn't say all the looting, but some of the looting is, being that we were just at not too long ago, 20% unemployment. So there's a lot of people out there that are hurting in general that just need something, and it's kind of sad that they chose this movement to hop on board to benefit from, but people that are hurting are hurting. It doesn't matter. Anger goes in all directions, and I think that's what we need to fix is when one of us is angry, the whole community wrapping around that person and giving as much support as possible, regardless of color, regardless of ethnicity, and really doing what we can to serve each other, you know?
I think this is just the beginning.
Oh yeah.
I said, well, how can you be so negative? I said, I'm not being negative. This is just the beginning of something that's big behind all of this that's about to happen. And the thing is, we got to listen. We got to look and see what's going on. My acting coach, I had another acting coach, he told me, he said, see with your ears and hear with your eyes.
There you go.
That's what you get. That's the key right there.
There you go.
You got to understand, you can't just look at it. You got to hear it. What you hear, you got to see it.
Oh yeah.
And that's what they're not doing. It's all linear vision, so to speak. So they're not. I don't really think they get it.
Yeah, being Christian, I always fall back on that scripture. Quick to listen, slow to anger, slow to speak. And I think that's something that we should all definitely pay attention to. Is just not be so quick to anger when you see it pop up on social media, because you never know where these folks are coming from and their own history of hurt. And I think that's, no matter what color you are, you're gonna have a history of hurt behind what is going on in your life. And a lot of times, even though what people speak from it may be wrong, stepping from that history of hurt, we got to figure out what damage they incurred along the way and try to help fix that, try to help heal that. So.
Yeah, we got to teach our children also that your life is like a business. You got to manage it. If you don't manage your life, it's like a business, it's going to fail. So if you teach them, when you teach your children how to drive, you don't put them behind the wheel right away.
Right.
You teach them along the way, then you give them the key. The problem with us is we give everybody a key to our lives and everybody trying to drive us.
Wow.
You're in the passenger seat of your own life and somebody else is driving you. That's why they got an old term saying, you're driving me crazy. Well, you gave them the key. That's why they're driving me crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that makes sense.
Once you take back that key, you drive your life.
Right.
If they don't agree, stop and put them out. You can go. But you want to ride with me, then you got to understand let me be the driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in control. But until you take the keys from all those people, all those negative people, they're going to be driving you all different directions, and you have no idea where the hell you're going.
Oh yeah, and that'll break that hive mentality, definitely. You know, because we're growing up in a society where we think cancel culture is the way. If somebody's upset with something, let's cancel them out. And honestly, I don't think that's necessarily a needed thing. I watched HBO is taking Gone with the Wind off the air. I'm like, Gone with the Wind is a historical setup of a piece. You don't need to do that because of us. I get taking down Confederate flags. I get that. I get taking down statues of people of the Confederacy or of that were slave owners. I get that. We should not celebrate that. you know. But media, I think I think once we start applying censorship to each other, we forget the censorship that we apply to somebody today will be the censorship that's applied to us tomorrow. Yeah. And we got to be careful as a society to stop that. You know, they were trying to cancel out Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle's just speaking his mind. You don't got to watch. You know, you can turn off the TV, and with all the access we got with streaming services, it's so easy to turn off that program and go to another program. But people want to jump up and protest and cancel out programs, and it's like, that's not needed. I'd want to hear from Bill Burr or some voice of somebody else that doesn't necessarily agree with mine. You know, not saying that I disagree with Bill, but it's just one of those things that it's a different voice, and maybe I don't agree with all of what they're saying, but you know, I appreciate them and respect. Like there was other comedians that are out there that were saying things that I didn't agree with, but I wouldn't have just jumped up and said they need to be gone. I mean, they're viewing life through that lens, and that's what I think where comedy is at, where you can speak on it. And all media should be that way, to where you can speak your mind, because that's what it was meant to be. You speak what you think.
Everybody got a voice on something.
Exactly.
There's one thing that happened. I saw on the news. I was like, that's not right. There are all these white people on their knees asking for forgiveness of what their ancestors did.
Right.
Going,
get off on your knees.
You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Your ancestors did it. You didn't do it.
Right.
So why are you asking for forgiveness? I don't know how many it was or why they were doing it. But I didn't agree with it.
I think the heart was in the right place, but you know, if we kneel, let's all kneel together. Black, white, everybody, let's kneel together.
Exactly.
If we pray together, let's all pray together. You don't need to kneel in front of me. And it's not, people need to make a difference and understand that there's a difference between kneeling and bowing. They were kneeling, they weren't bowing to black folks, but that was unneeded to be apologetic for what their ancestors did.
That was nice.
Because those folks didn't do it, you know, like, unless there's any way to get your ancestors to come back from the grave and apologize for it, there's no reason to apologize for them. What they do need to check, though, is all these people defending, you know, like I said, like, you know, black folks being victimized. That needs to stop. You know, it's like, look, you can't sit here and be like, well, my ancestors didn't do it, but George Floyd, we shouldn't be celebrating George Floyd. He deserved to die. This, that, the other, or Ahmaud Arbery deserved to die, and whatnot. You can't. Those two things, those two mentalities, can't operate in the same realm, because you're telling us that man lost his life. You know, that person losing his life was justified, and that's not okay. You know.
But I think that once the dust settles, it's going to be back to square one.
Oh yeah.
But however, all those people out there, non-black people that were marching, they're not going to settle for it again. And I think the next time it happens, it's going to be worse.
Oh yeah.
You know, so we got to come together as one unit and live as one unit. If we don't, you know, this ship is sinking.
Oh yeah.
We got to start building out the water together. We're all going to sink.
Yeah.
We're all going to drown.
I think we all.
Every man for himself.
Yeah, and I think we all need to get off of that idea of party politics, because I think it also kind of plays into it. You know what I mean? Like we need to say now. You know, it doesn't matter if you have a liberal voice or conservative voice. Let's all get together and just talk it out and enjoy. Enjoy a moment of not blaming each other. That's going to be awesome. It's like enjoying a moment of not pointing the finger and said, you liberal this or you conservative this. That's the day that I'm waiting for.
I think at the end, we're going to get it right.
I think so.
I can see it now.
I think so.
Prejudice and war. It's going to happen.
Baby steps.
It's going to happen.
So, we're at that point where we see each other now. You know, you see me, I see you. We have a duty at this point in time not to let either one of us be abused by, not only not being abused by authority, but not even being abused by each other out in the streets. It don't matter what color you are, It don't matter where your background is, what your sexual preference is, or what you identify as, or what you identify with. That needs to stop. You know, you see wrong, you stop wrong. It's easy. You know, it's a simple mentality. You know.
I think I don't think people understand what the word race. Like, I was brought up by the Bible, and race is not even mentioned, except for one place, that when the race is given to the swift, so forth. Mm-hmm. But the race means to compete, to get ahead. You're on a team. You got your white team, you got your black team, you got the brown team, and everybody's racing toward this finish line that's not even there.
Right.
You know, so why compete against each other when we can just come together as one? And I think that once we look at that aspect of what races really is, then I think we will look at each other as equals, as one unit. Mm. This could be paradise.
Oh, it could be.
I mean, look at what's going on. This could be paradise, man. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
There's so much we can enjoy. We can enjoy each other instead of fighting each other. Why fight each other? It's a constant grind. You know, it's like, listen to gears grind day after day after day. Don't you get tired of that after a while?
Oh man, I'm telling you,
like,
you know.
But I think it's going to change. You know, it's going to take a while. I go back as far as President Eisenhower. Yeah, so you know I'm old, right? I was young, but I remember my parents and all talking about Eisenhower. I just see him on a black and white TV. So I've been through what 10 presidents, I think, since then. You know, some of them did get reelected. But I see the change from then to now. There's a whole big difference. You know, somewhere between Eisenhower and Trump, politicians kind of change course, and it's all about them, and it's not all about the people.
Right.
It's all about their future. You know, that's all they're concerned about. Okay, when you gonna be concerned about us? People can see that nowadays. They see it. You're not concerned about the blacks, you're not concerned about white folk, you're not concerned about anybody.
Concerned about re-election.
You know, and people always say, well, you know, back when Republicans, blacks were Republicans, but things change. Now the Democrats are taking you here and all that. It changes. I mean, politics has caused more problems for all of us. Mm.
I think it's interesting that the average time of a politician in office is at least somewhere close to 30 years. We've been dealing with the same issues for easily twice that long, yet now they decide to care. You know, you should have been fighting this policy and been just as vocal before. You could have been putting money into communities that were lacking for education and all that, just like you did the stimulus package. Could have done that already. You had the money to do it. You had a capability to do it. It just wasn't important to you until things were burning.
I think we just have to teach our kids, and they talk to their friends, and get the dominoes falling. That we can't live in a racial society anymore.
No,
it's not going to work, because we're still in their future by wasting all this time with the hate. Well, look what we're doing to these kids. Yeah. They can see it. They say, no, I don't want no part of that. That's why they're out there.
And that goes on all sides. I mean, like, we were both taught not to just pigeonhole white folks to be in a certain way.
Yeah, can't do that.
We gotta make sure our kids don't do that either. Just don't be against everybody. Understand, folks are different. Everybody has their own story. Because, like you said, it's stealing time. Kids are gonna waste too much time being angry.
Yeah, my stepmother, my mother-in-law in Mississippi, she used to house the Freedom Riders. Mm. Those 3 guys that got killed in Mississippi. I don't know if they actually lived there, but she used to house people like that. Mm. And they used to feed them, and they used to, make sure they got rest, and then they went on the way. But they were the Freedom Riders. She was, I can't remember the name of it. But they housed those people. And the KKK used to hang around their particular house to see who was there so they can follow them.
Oh, wow.
So you had to do it at a
That's
certain, you had to do it at a certain time.
Wow.
But they had a write-up on her in the, that was New York Times. It could have been New York Times, about her part in playing the role that she played in helping them. But a lot of people lost their lives trying to help us. So you can't take hate in your heart, and there's people out there fighting for you. You can't, it doesn't work that way.
I think always generalizing people to being a certain way is ignorance. It's the biggest show of ignorance, because you're not given any time for any type of change. You're automatically keeping them to that. So, yeah. Yeah.
So I remember the Freedom Route as well.
Oh man.
And my wife, she remember they used to come, and my mother-in-law used to feed them, and they used to talk throughout the night, and so yeah, that was part of history.